If someone was to ask me what my favorite function is in Excel, the filter function would definitely be in the top 3, maybe even number 1. And the reason why I love the filter function so much is because it's so versatile in many different scenarios. There are so many ways that we can utilize filter, but in its most basic form, it allows us to filter a range of data based on specific criteria, and it will return an array of values based on that specific criteria. So it's particularly useful if you're trying to extract subsets of data from larger datasets. So in this video, we're going to take an extensive look at the filter function. We're not just going to do a basic filter. I'm going to go through and show you all of the different logical operators you can use in order to perform different types of filter. And if you stay tuned all the way to the end, I'm also going to show you how you can compare two ranges of data together to see the differences using the filter function. So let's get started. Now let's start out first of all by just getting ourselves familiar with the data that we're going to be using, because we're going to be using similar data throughout most of these examples. So what I have here is a list of students. We have the exam that they've sat, the grade they achieved, the date they sat the exam, and the month. Now, what I'm trying to do here is over in columns J to N, I want to be able to see a list of students based on specific criteria. And that criteria is going to be listed in column H. So we're going to set up some data validation drop-down lists in a moment so that we can go in, we can select an exam, a month, and a grade. And over here, it should extract from the main table of data the results that match those pieces of criteria. Now, before we get into all of that, it is worth mentioning that the filter function is like the filter drop-downs, but in a formula. For example, if I was to click in these column headings, go to data and turn on my filters, you can see I get these drop-downs. So if I wanted to filter and see only the students that sat the French exam, I can simply select French, click on OK, and it's going to filter those results. Now this output just here, this is what I would expect to see over here if I'd selected French exam in my data validation drop-down list. So with all that said, you might be thinking, well, why do I need it? Why can't I just carry on using my filters? Well, you can. Filter drop-downs are still there and available for you to use, but the filter function just provides an alternative way of doing the same thing, with the added benefit of being able to output your filter results anywhere in your workbook. I'm not stuck with just having them listed over here. I can output them to any cells. And also, because filter is a function, it means that we can combine it with other functions to make it more useful. For example, I can combine filter with sort in order to sort my filtered list. So let's start by putting our main dataset into a table. This is going to make it easier for us to make selections. So I'm going to click somewhere inside the table and we can press Ctrl T. Yes, my table has headers, so we want that checked. Let's click on OK. Now, I really dislike that table style, so straight away we're going to go to the table design ribbon and we're going to choose a different table style, and I'm going to go for none. And then up on the table design ribbon, which we can now see, in the properties group, notice here it says table name is just table 5. And as always, I would recommend you give your tables a meaningful name to make them easy to identify. So I'm going to click here and I'm just going to call this students and press enter. The next step would be to set up our criteria. And in this case, our criteria is going to be in data validation drop-down lists. So the first drop-down list here is going to be for the exam column. So I want a unique list of the exams listed in my data validation drop-down. And the good news is a change has been made recently to Excel so that we don't have to create a unique list of the exams first of all. It will automatically happen when we create the data validation drop-down. So let's go up to data. Let's go into data tools and select data validation. Now on the settings tab, we want to create a list, and the source for our list is going to be the exams column. Now, if you have your data in a table, you can simply hover your mouse over that column heading until you see that black down pointing arrow and click once. That's going to select the entire column. Let's click on OK. And what we should now find is that when we click the drop down, we have a unique list of all of those exams, which is perfect. Let's do the same for the month. We're going to go back up to data, into data validation. We're going to create another list, but this time the source is the month column. And click on OK. And we only have 2 months here, January and February. Let's do it one last time for the grade column. We're going to choose List, and the source this time is grade. Click on OK, and now we can see those. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to select some random things in each of these drop downs. So we'll go for January and let's go for grade B. So the current criteria that I'm filtering by are all of the students that took English exams in the month of January and achieved a grade B. So now we're ready to create our filter formula. Now, the first thing to make note of is what you want to return. Now, in this case, I want to return all columns from the table. I want to see all the information based off of my filter. You don't have to do this if you are only interested in the student and the exam. You can return just those columns, but in this case, I want to return everything. So let's type in filter. Now, the first argument is the array. Now, the array argument is where we tell Excel what we want to return. So as I just mentioned, I want to return all columns. So my array is going to be everything in the table, basically the entire students table, comma. The next argument is what we want to include in our filter. Now, just for this first example, I'm only going to filter by English exams. Now, just for this first example, just to ease us in, I'm only going to filter for students who sat the English exam. So one piece of criteria effectively. So for the include argument, we want to filter the exam column, and we only want to see results that are equal to what we have selected in H5, which currently is English. Now, the final optional argument here is if empty. Notice it's in square brackets, which means it's not a mandatory argument. However, I would highly recommend that you do utilize this third argument because this tells Excel what you want to appear in the cell if there are no results. So if we didn't have any students in the table who had sat the English exam, instead of having an error in the cell, I just want it to say no records. So we're going to put that in quote marks as it's text, and we're going to close off our filter formula. So we're just filtering for one piece of criteria. When we hit enter, you should see that's exactly what we get. We're now seeing all of the students who sat the English exam only. And if I was to change this drop down to, let's say, French, the list is going to automatically update. So this is working well so far. Now, in this example, we just use one piece of criteria, and that was the exam. But what if we want to filter by 2 or more pieces of criteria? Maybe I want to filter this data set by the exam and let's say by the grade. Well, we can do that, but this is where we introduce logical operators into our formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete out the filter that we just did and let's start again from the beginning, but this time we're going to use 2 pieces of criteria. So the array, again, that's what we want to return, which is all of the columns in our students table. Now this time with the include argument, because we have more than one piece of criteria, we need to wrap each piece of criteria in curly brackets. So I'm going to open a curly bracket. Our first piece of criteria is if the exam is equal to what we have in this cell, and then we need to close off our criteria. Now we're going to add our second piece of criteria, but I need to separate them with an asterisk. So what is the asterisk? Well, in this case, the asterisk means we're doing an AND calculation. So it's going to search for all records that match the exam science and all records that match the grade B. So it's looking for both because the asterisk means we're doing an AND condition. So let's open our second bracket and we can add in our second piece of criteria and let's choose the grade. So we're going to say when the grade column is equal to what we have in here. Close the bracket, comma, and then we can add in what we want it to say if it can't match any records. So that is our formula with 2 pieces of criteria separated by an asterisk because we're doing AND logic. Both have to be true in order to return the result. Let's press enter and you can see we only have 1 record. If I was to change this to French, we have 2 records, And if I was to change this to C, there's only one student that sat the French exam and achieved a grade C. But what about if we want to do something else? What about if we want to do an OR? Let's check that out. This time I have a similar example. We have the same data set. We have similar filters. We're filtering by exam and grade. And I've already created the data validation drop-down list for these. And we want to output our results over here. The difference this time is that we're doing an OR condition. So if I was to do my filter formula now, I'd be filtering for all students who sat the English exam or students who got a grade C. So what would that look like? Let's type in filter. Our array, again, is going to be what we want to return, which is all columns. And in this example, the table is called exam results. Now I want to match two pieces of criteria. I need to encase them in curly brackets. Let's open one. I want to include when the exam is equal to what we have in cell G5, close the bracket. But this time, instead of an asterisk, we need a plus, because a plus in this case means OR. Let's open a bracket. Our second piece of criteria is that the grade column needs to equal what we have in cell G8. Close it off, comma, and then I want my catch-all at the end of no records. Close off filter, press enter. So what we should see here in our results is that it's returning anybody who sat the English exam or achieved a result of grade C. So for the first one here, Lucy Carter, she sat the English exam, but she got a grade B. But that's okay because she matches one of these pieces of criteria. Brooke Burns, she sat science, but she got a grade C. That's why I'm seeing her in the list. We're doing an OR condition. So that's the difference between AND, where both pieces of criteria need to be true in order to return the record, and OR, where only one of them does. Let's take a look at another example. In this example, we're going to use the filter function to return one or the other, but not both. And you can see here we have a slightly different data set this time. We've got some sales agents, the teams they work on, the location they're in, and the revenue that they've generated. And I want to return all of the columns based on these two pieces of criteria. Now with my pieces of criteria here, when it comes to the revenue, what we're going to say is that we want to return results that are greater than 40,000. And what I've actually done in here is I've put in some benchmarks. So I haven't just listed out all of the revenue values. I've manually typed in 15,000, 30,000 and 40,000. So I can use these as thresholds to say, okay, return results that are above or below one of these three numbers. So in this case, we're going to return, in this first example, all records that are greater than 40,000. Now with the one or the other but not both operator, it means it's going to return anybody from the table who's located in London or has revenue greater than 40,000, but it won't return anybody who's from London and has revenue greater than 40,000. So it's one or the other, but never both. Now this time, we're going to type in filter. Our array is going to be all of the columns. That's what we want to return. And our table's called sales rev in this example. We have two pieces of criteria, so we need to open a curly bracket. Our first piece is that the location needs to equal what we have in cell G5, close the curly bracket, and this time we separate our pieces of criteria using a minus. That's what denotes one or the other, but not both. Open a bracket, and we want to say when the revenue is greater than what we have in this cell. Close the bracket, comma. Let's add in our catch-all and close off our filter. Press enter to see our results. So here we should be seeing all of the people who are located in London or generated revenue that's greater than 40,000. What we won't see in here are any sales agents who are located in London and also achieved revenue greater than 40,000. And of course, this is going to update if we were to change our drop downs. Let's change it to greater than 30,000 and we get a much longer list. So that minus symbol, one or the other, but not both. Let's take a look at our final operator. The final operator is the equals operator, and that basically means both or neither. So in this case, where we have French as the exam and the grade as B, in order to return a result, both of these must be true or neither must be true. So let's construct our filter. Our array is going to be all of our columns. We're going to open a bracket. Our first piece of criteria is that the exam is equal to what we have in cell H5. And this time we need to separate our criteria with an equals. Let's open a bracket. And this time our criteria is that the grade needs to equal what we have in cell H8. Close the bracket, comma, and then we need our catch-all. Close off our filter, press enter, and we get a much longer list. So what we're seeing in here are all of the records where neither criteria matches. So basically everybody who didn't sit the French exam and didn't achieve a grade of B. That's why you're seeing all of these people in here. However, if we scroll down, you can see just here we have Joanne Yates. Now she sat the French exam and she achieved a grade B. So she matches both of these. So that's what I'm saying. It will return results where it's an exact match for both or a match for neither. Now, of course, you could use many more pieces of criteria than the ones I've shown you here. You can carry on going with your brackets, just adding in as much criteria as you need. You just need to remember which operator you want to use to separate each piece of criteria, because that really does impact on the type of results that you're getting. And as I mentioned, with this filter function, we could then add a sort onto the front if we wanted to sort these results. So maybe I want to sort the students into ascending or descending order by their name. So if we go up to our filter formula and type in sort at the beginning, the array is being generated by our filter formula. So I'm going to click at the end here, comma. We can then choose the sort index. So that is, which column do we want to sort by? Now, if I want to sort by the student name, that is column number 1. And then I can choose if I want to sort in ascending or descending order. So I'm going to have a 1 in here for ascending. That's it. I'm going to close off my formula, hit enter, and you can see my results are now sorted. In every example that we've looked at so far using the filter function, we've been filtering or returning columns that are next to each other. So we've been returning all of the columns in the dataset in our results area. But sometimes we might want to return columns that aren't next to each other, so non-adjacent columns. So in this example, I'm going to show you how you can do that using a little Excel trick. Now, we're using a very similar example. We still have our students and their exams. If I go to the table design tab, this table is called Students 7. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to do this with my data outside of a table. I know that a lot of people, particularly when they're learning Excel, find table references in formulas a little bit confusing. Sometimes it's easier to learn when you're using ranges. So let's take this data out of a table. This is another nice little trick. I'm going to click in my table, go up to the table design ribbon, and in the tools group, we have convert to range. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to convert my table to a normal range. And now we're just back to a regular data set that isn't inside a table. Now, this time, I only want to return the student, the exam, and the month. So effectively, this column here, but also this column over here. So we don't want to include the grade or the date. So my filter results are going to be non-adjacent columns. So how do we do this? Well, let's go in with filter. Our first argument is the array. Now, it doesn't matter which columns you want to include. For the array argument, you need to make sure that you include all of the columns that you need. Now, because the first 2 columns I want to include are at the beginning of the table and the month column is at the end of the table, I need to select the entire data set again. And because I don't have this data in a table, I kind of need to drag down. Notice here, this time we have cell references B3 to F41, comma. What do we want to include? Well, this time I'm including when the exam is equal to science and the month is equal to February. So we're going to open a bracket. We want to include when the exam column, Control Shift down arrow and Control backspace to jump back up, is equal to what we have in cell H5. Let's close the bracket. We're going to do an AND because we want both of these to be included in our returned results, and then we're going to open another bracket. And our second piece of criteria is when the month, Control Shift down arrow and Control backspace to jump to the top, is equal to what we have in this cell just here. So pretty much like we have been doing so far. Let's close off the bracket. Let's add in our catch-all and close off the filter. Now when I press enter, I'm going to get all of the columns returned because in the array part of this formula, I specified the entire table. Now I only want the student, the exam, and the month. So how can we modify this formula? Well, it's pretty simple. We add in another filter. So I'm going to click right at the beginning and we're going to add filter onto the front. The array argument this time is the entirety of our first filter formula. So we just need to click at the end, press comma, and then specify what we want to include. Now, the way that this works is based on the fact that we have true and false results. So any columns that I want to return, we need a true or a 1, and any columns we don't want to return, we need a false or a 0. And we need to encase these inside curly brackets. So these brackets just here. So I do want to include the student column, so that is true, which is a 1, comma. I do want to include the exam column, so that's also a 1. I don't want to include grade, so that's a false or a 0. I don't want to include date, so we need another 0. And then I do want to include the month, so that is a 1. Close off the curly brackets and close off that second filter. Now when we press enter, we should find we're just getting exactly what we want. The student name, the exam, and the month. And if I switch this to something else, you can see that everything updates nicely. So that is a little hack to return non-adjacent columns when you're using the filter formula. Now, just to finish off, I'm going to show you something different, and that is how to use filter to compare two datasets. So let's take a look at that. Now, here we have a couple of lists of, let's say, student names. And these students in the registered column all registered for an Excel webinar. But in actual fact, these are the only people who actually turned up and attended the webinar. So what I want to do is extract a list of just the people who didn't attend so that I can send them an email. Now we can do this using a combination of filter and COUNTIF. So if we type in equals filter, the array that we want to filter are just the people who registered this first column. Now if I was to go into a COUNTIF just here, our range is going to be the people who attended, and our criteria is going to be the people who registered again. Close off COUNTIF, close off filter. Now, if I just leave it like this and press enter, but this list isn't quite what I'm looking for. This list is basically showing me all of the people who actually attended. I want to find out who didn't attend. So all we need to do is go back up to the formula, and in front of the COUNTIF, we're going to type in not. And don't forget to go to the end, close off a bracket, hit enter, and now we have a list of all of the people who failed to turn up for the webinar. And if we just do a quick visual check just to make sure that this is correct, here it says Brian Gosling didn't attend. So I can see that Brian Gosling did in fact register, but if we look through this list, his name isn't there. The same for Tom Bruce. He registered, but he didn't actually attend. So hopefully you found that video useful. I see a lot of people discussing the filter function all the time on YouTube. I just don't see a lot of people discussing the different operators and the different filters that you can apply. If you enjoyed this video, then consider subscribing. We certainly do appreciate it. Like, share, follow, leave a comment if you so desire, and I'll see you next time.